Hi everybody, Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today I've got Scott Springer, and we're going to be talking about designing and creating a manufacturing strategy and why, if you're a manufacturer, why that's so important. Scott, before we get into it, where can people find you?
Find me one of two places, either on LinkedIn. You can search me, find me on LinkedIn, or you can go to my website for my consulting group, www.chelwoodgroup.com. It's CHEL woodgroup.com.
So Scott, let's dig into this.
Okay.
I, from my sins, have actually spent 5 years in the world of manufacturing and supply chain. So hopefully I can ask you a couple of questions which are useful. But at a high level, if there's anybody that runs a manufacturing organization, why is it they need it? Why do they need a strategy? And I know that may sound like obvious, but sometimes things aren't obvious.
Yeah, well, I've come across so many companies that are reactive to the sales and marketing results, right? And you got to be proactive on that. So you need a strategy, and it's going to start with your product, what the sales projections are, marketing projections on how much we're going to grow, and then the overall business strategy. How much are we going to grow the business for the next 5 years or 10 years? From that, you build your strategy so that you don't get hit by the tidal wave when sales comes in, or if sales are going to go down, that you don't react quick enough. You have to be ahead of the game either way, whether you're going up or coming down. Hopefully, going up, right? Like, we all want to do. But you got to be ahead of the game. Otherwise, the catch up, and if you fall behind, it can sink a company before it can even take off.
Because I used to sell a product that it was for demand planning. So what you did was you took the software product and you fed in the sales forecast.
Yeah.
And then it had an algorithm that chugged around and came out with a magic number.
Yeah.
And I don't want to. I'm deliberately not using supply chain words. I'm trying to keep the language simple.
Yeah.
And it was just, there was just so many companies that were basically just living month by month by feeding in the sales forecast, and that comes out with a figure, and that we're going to go and make that.
Yeah.
And I could never believe that, but it's the truth.
Yeah, and you know what? In some companies, you have to do that just because of the nature of their business. They don't have this long-term forecast. But even if you're like a contract manufacturer, I deal with a lot of contract manufacturers, so they can't make for months ahead of time. They are doing that week to week, month to month as the sales come in, but they still have to do some capacity planning around equipment, people, how many hours you're going to run, how to maintain a very high safety standard, very high quality standard as you're growing, because that's usually what falls off first. People, they start scrambling when the business is growing, and then the quality falls off. And when the quality falls off, sales fall off.
Yep.
And it's this vicious cycle that companies get into.
So if you're going to do this, where do you start?
I always start with what the sales forecast.
Okay.
Right. Where do you want to be a year from now, 3 years from now?
So this is not just this month's sales forecast. It's actually a projection in terms of where you want to be.
Where do you want to be? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
exactly.
It's a 3-5 year plan.
This month is more reactive. There's no strategy around this month. You're going to be reactive, right? But let's not be reactive 6 months to a year from now. So how much are you going to be growing? Are you going to be growing 10%, 20%, 100%? I work for a company, Vital Proteins. We grew 100% a year. When I was first told that, I didn't believe the sales team. I mean, I've never been involved with something like that. But we planned for the 100% growth. Worst case, 50% growth, but we were hitting 100% growth. But you got to plan that. You got to plan it around what type of equipment do we need? How much do we need to expand? How much warehouse space do we need? How many people do we need? How many people do you need in every position in order to handle the 100% year-over-year growth?
Plus the fact that you're going to lose people, so that you've got the attrition and
right.
And also I guess there's some sort of you've got you've got work in progress, plus you've got raw materials. So where are they going to go?
Yep. Yeah. You do your supply chain planning, and part of the turnover. You don't want turnover. Turnover kills growth, right? And so part of your strategy is, what are we going to do over the next year to 2 years to minimize that turnover? And that's accommodations. It's like that workplace environment, it's salary, it's how you treat people, it's the training you provide people, it's the culture that you want to create in an organization that provide an environment that people want to work there.
Yeah.
Versus, yeah, they're coming to work for a paycheck and that's it. It's like, you don't want that environment, because then you get the high turnover. When you get the high turnover, the growth becomes that much more difficult.
Because ultimately, you're probably, in any manufacturing process, you're probably having to train people to do certain things.
Yeah.
And then again, you want the culture. I mean, I remember the story about when somebody bought Lotus cars, and the first thing they did was that they basically laid all of the parts out of a car, and they got everybody to come in and discuss it. And they realized they could actually take certain parts away, or they could manufacture them in different, because they were talking to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, depending on the industry, you get these operators that come in and they might be able to do the job in a day or two or a week, but they're just doing the job. They're not very good at it. Right. What I've seen, it usually takes a good year to 2 years, depending on the role that they're doing, before somebody becomes a good manufacturing technician working on a manufacturing line. That's when they get really efficient. They get very safe. They're consistently making quality products versus making minor mistakes that causes issues down the line. So that's why you want to reduce that turnover, because if you got a year and if you're constantly turning over 25% of your workforce a year, you don't get many people that are there for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the line. You want to keep that turnover very low. It's not rocket science what they're doing, but there is an art and a science, and there's a technique and a repetition. The operators get much better over time. And then once they become that, top tier operator, you want to keep them. You don't want to lose them to turnover.
So when we talked before, we talked about having a manufacturing strategy, and part of that manufacturing strategy was putting in the sales element of it. But
Yeah.
I've written down in my notes here the theory of constraints and
Yep.
where are the bottlenecks.
Yes. Yeah. And so
explain to me what the theory of constraints are.
Yeah. Okay. So theory of constraints, that goes, it's a book years ago. And the theory of constraints is there's always going to be a bottleneck in a company's organization or in a manufacturing plant, right? Ideally, you kind of want that bottleneck or that theory of constraint to be the sales number, so that operations and manufacturing can keep up with any sort of sales, right? So if a company is planning on growing 20%, make sure you increase your manufacturing capacity by 30 or 40%, so that, or able to increase it by 30 or 40% quickly, so that you can keep up with any sales surges in that. Often, though, what happens is, if you got this big growth in sales and you haven't planned a manufacturing or operation side, you end up having bottlenecks within the manufacturing. It could be your supply chain. You don't have enough material to make the product you're making. It could be on your manufacturing line. It could be that one critical piece of equipment that is there's always going to be a slowest piece of equipment on a line. Always going to be, right? No matter what it is. It could be the front of the line, back of the line. It could be a filler. It could be a robot, whatever it is. Something is going to be the slowest piece of equipment on that line. That becomes your constraint for that line, right? Yeah. Sometimes in today's labor force, it could be the number of people you can hire, because you can't bring in the people fast enough. Plants can run 4 shifts. 24/7 is 4 shifts. If you can't staff for 24/7, that's your constraint. So there's always a constraint. You always have to know what your constraint is now, and what's it going to be 3 months from now once you fix your current constraint. If your constraint is sales, and all of a sudden sales jumps up, what's your next constraint? Where's the first speed bump that you're going to hit as as a company grows?
So the theory of constraints really is about understanding, isn't it, the process?
Yes.
And once you solve one bottleneck, you're going to move to the next bottleneck.
Yep.
There's always going to be some part of the process which is going to be slow, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah. I'll give you an example. First time I was a plant manager, it was a packaging plant, and we were packaging edible oil for commercial markets, going to like restaurants and stuff. And we had to increase the output of our liquid filling line, which filled 5-gallon jugs. And the bottleneck on that line was the filler. And most lines, the way you design it, the filler is the bottleneck or that constraint on that line. And so we did a Kaizen event for a week, and we wanted to increase the output of that line.
You did a what?
It's a Kaizen event. It's a week-long activity where you get a group of people where they are going to drastically improve an area of the line. That week, we wanted that filler by the end of the week to run like 25% faster than it was at the beginning of the week. And they did it. It was running 25% faster. So that what that did was that moved the constraint from the filler to the capper. The capper became the new constraint on that line. And then so that became the limiting speed of the line. So as fast as that capper can run was as fast as that line could run. The week prior, it was the filler. The filler was running all out. The capper was running at like 80%. By the end of the week, the filler was running 90% at the new speed, and the capper was running at 100%.
And if there's anybody watching, and the book that Scott I've mentioned is that the book's called The Theory of Constraints, and it's written by a guy called Eli Goldratt. It's probably 25 years old, but it's still relevant today, and it's a lovely book because it's written as a novel.
Yeah, and it's a great book, and it's about a Boy Scout troop, and Herbie was the slow Boy Scout in the hike, and and everything, they were trying to figure out how to hike faster, and end up being around designing the process around Herbie, who was the slowest hiker. It's the same thing in manufacturing. You design your factory around the slowest piece of equipment. Now, your slowest hiker, your slowest piece of equipment moves over time, and you got to be aware of that and react or be proactive and design your strategies to fix those over time.
So I've also written down demand planning and process planning in my notes.
Yes. So demand planning, very similar to the software system you designed. You're always going to have supplies in manufacturing, whatever that is. It could be some sort of raw material, because you're converting it, or it could be another supplier that's providing you stuff. Prime example, when I was at Vital Proteins, our primary ingredient was collagen peptides. And when I first started, we had a serious constraint on the amount of high quality. There was plenty of collagen peptides in the world, but there was not high quality collagen peptides. And so a lot of the suppliers had to catch up, and they did over the next year. One of our top suppliers, they doubled the size of their plant to meet our demand. But it took a year. It took a year and a half, and we were struggling when I first got there to have, like I said, there's plenty of cars in the world, but there's not plenty of high quality cars. There's you can buy a used beater up anytime, any day, but it's the same thing in manufacturing. You want to make sure you have good, high quality supply and enough of it. And when you're talking to the suppliers, they can provide you for today, but it's a good idea to understand what are their limitations. Like with this plant, it's like, okay, how much of our volume that we're buying is your capacity of your plant? Well, it might be 30%. Well, how much are other customers taking up? Well, if they're taking up 70%, that means their plant is tapped out. Their plant is full. They can't make anymore. And that was the case that we had at the beginning when I started Vital Proteins with our number one supplier. It was like, because if we're going 100% and they can't supply it, which was the case at the time, something has to give somewhere. We got to start figuring, we got to find alternative suppliers, or our number one supplier needed to increase the capacity of the plant, which is what we did, which is what they did to keep up with us. But you got to know your supply chain, make sure that you have, either your primary has plenty of capacity or have alternate suppliers as a backup plan, if you outstrip your supply.
So we also talked about brainstorming for continuous improvement.
Yeah, and definitely. And you want to get to the point, and this becomes a part of that strategy over time, because usually when you go into a plant, they're not in that, the ones that I've been to, I'm usually like a turnaround guy. They're not in a continuous improvement mindset. So you got to build that strategy of training and people development and creating that culture so that the continuous improvement comes quicker and people are more willing to participate. Usually when I go to a plant, it was like that first few months, I'll say, people aren't as willing to participate for whatever reason, so you get into that brainstorming and it's just like you're getting nothing because people are not providing stuff. Eventually you get the culture, you develop the culture, you get people who, like, everybody wants to improve the factory they're in, and they enjoy it. It's fun. It's like a game. It's like, how fast can you run? How many can you make? How high can you jump? It's always, that's what it becomes.
Yep.
And the best part of when you get people highly involved, and this is what I love, people would ask, like, hey, who came up with the idea? It's like, well, everybody. It wasn't a one person idea. It was like, I might have an idea. Tim has an idea. And then we got Bob on the floor who listens to Scott and Tim, and he takes a part of Tim's idea, a part of Scott's idea, and makes another idea. And then Julie takes our three ideas and adds on, and everybody piles on, that brainstorming. And the brainstorming needs to be open. Every idea is open. And usually the best solution isn't one person solution. I would say 99% of the time, when you have a very open culture, continuous improvement culture, it's a combination of 4 or 5, a half a dozen people on how to improve a process or how to change, basically implement the continuous improvement that you're working on.
And you talked also about how to actually break those up into projects. And then what you did was you talked about an impact difficulty matrix.
Yeah.
Which is impact versus cost.
Yep.
And then working out a priority. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So when I'm making a big long-term strategy, so let's say a 3-year plan, right? You can't fix everything this week or this month. A lot of times in plants, and people think, oh, my plant runs great. It's like, anybody who's been in manufacturing for a while can walk in and find 100 areas of improvement in any factory in the world. Toyota's been, probably one of the best manufacturing plants, and their list is astronomical. While plants that are like subpar, they can't find stuff. It's just your eyes start to open up. So you end up throwing all the different ideas, the brainstorming ideas. So you get all the senior managers, senior operators, and just create lists of areas where you want to improve. And I usually try to divide it up into areas: safety improvements, quality improvements, productivity improvements, work-life balance improvements, culture improvements. And you get all these ideas. And, sometimes you have 50, sometimes you have 100. I was working at one plant, we had over 200 different ideas to implement. We don't even have enough people to implement all these, right? So we're going to plan this out over 2 years or 3 years, the improvements, based on how much people can handle. We got bandwidth. There's only so many managers, so many supervisors and operators are running the plant, and the managers are a lot of times the point of contact to drive the improvement, but they got little sub teams for each little project. So let's say you got 100 projects that you want to implement over the next few years to drastically improve the status of the plant. So I love the impact difficulty matrix, and you described it great. On the vertical column, you have the impact, and that could be generally it's a financial impact to the company, or a quality improvement, significant quality improvement to the product. With the top of the bar, we would usually scale it from like 1 to 10. With 1 being, a little bit of improvement, 10 being a drastic improvement. And then across the bottom, it's a difficulty matrix. And that is, how much does it cost to implement, or how many people does it take to implement? So The real easy projects are ones. The extremely difficult or extremely expensive projects are the 10s. If you got a multi-million-dollar expansion, that's a 10. If you got one person can implement something in less than a month, that's a 1. If it takes 2 or 3 people to implement something over a quarter, that might be a 3. You kind of come up with your own where your scale is. So then we would put all the different ideas on Post-it notes. And actually, I just did this a couple of weeks ago with a company. You put all the ideas on Post-it notes, and everybody has their ideas, and you kind of vote as a team, where's the impact, on a scale from 1 to 10. Where's the difficulty from 1 to 10, and you put your Post-it note. And so now you go through all 100. You got 100 Post-it notes on this big board, right? And then you start in the upper left-hand corner. The biggest impact that are the easiest to implement, right? So the top left quadrant. And you work your way from the top left corner, and you work your way down, sweeping through the 1s and 2s, and you implement those first. So let's say the first quarter, we're going to do the top 5 projects in the top left quadrant.
Yep.
Second quarter, we're going to do the next 5. Third quarter, we're going to do the next 5, because the size of the plan with the number of people, we can maybe do 5 projects a quarter. Some projects take 6 months. Some projects you can do in 1 quarter, so you kind of map that out, and we would build a project plan based on people's time and bandwidth and cost, and start with the highest impact, easiest projects to implement, and work our way down until they're all covered. And generally the bottom right, the very expensive projects with little impact, you never even do. They just fall off.
You said, and I wrote this down when we met, was that you need to set up the plant for success this year and for the next 5 years.
Yes.
Which I thought was a lovely quote.
Yeah. And you definitely, like when you're laying out the projects, it's where do we want to be? Some companies like to do 3 years, some companies 5 years. It's like, where do we want to be 5 years from now? It's like X amount of profit. We want to be accident free. We want a great culture with low turnover. We want our lines running at an OEE of 60%, 90%, depending on the industry. And what are the different projects that are going to get us there 5 years from now? And you slowly work your way towards that. Not slowly. I mean, people are working 10, 12-hour days in plans to get you there, but lay it out, lay out the plan quarter by quarter on how you're going to get there.
Scott, thank you so much for coming on and talking about it. For me, the time has flown by because I happen to love talking about manufacturing and supply chain. Where can people find you?
Yeah, probably my website, chelwoodgroup.com, or you can send me an email at scott@chelwoodgroup.com. That's CHEL, woodgroup.com. We can help with strategies and plant design and anything to help your plant grow, business growth specialists, and that's where we are.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking, Scott. It's been excellent.